Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be bringing you my favourite books of the year so far. Not all of these books were published in 2021, although some of them were. These are just a list of books that I have read this year and really loved. I really enjoy doing this video midway through the year. It's a really great way of checking in with my reading and seeing why I've loved so far. And it's also really interesting to look back on this video at the end of the year and see what books came off the list when I'm looking at my favourite books of the year overall. I do have a few more videos that I'm going to be doing looking at my reading year so far. So I'm going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag, and I'm going to be doing a video on my reading statistics so far this year. So if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see those videos, make sure you hit the subscribe button. All of the books that I mentioned in this video will be linked down below in the description as well if you want to find out more about them. And while I have put these books in an order from 10 to 1, so my 10th favourite to my most absolute favourite, the order of them could change on any other day, apart from my absolute favourite book of the year so far. That is very firmly at the top of the list. So let's get into the books, starting with number 10, Happy by Derren Brown. Derren Brown you may know as being a TV illusionist. I'm not sure exactly how he would define what he does, but through the understanding of people that he has developed over the years through his work, he has come to know a lot about what people want to be, and he says a lot of what he does is just telling people stories that will make them happy. And this is a non-fiction book that really delves into that subject of happiness. What happiness means in our present day, what it has meant throughout history, going back to the ancient Greeks. He examines the self-help industry with a very critical lens, and he's also talking about the origins of things like cognitive behavioral therapy. And as someone who has done a lot of CBT in her life, I found a lot of value in learning about the historical origins of that. And at the time I read this book, I just found it so incredibly impactful. When I read this, it was at a time where I was really struggling with feelings around COVID and around lockdowns. I'm someone that kind of wants a lot of control over their own life, and this book taught me so much about how you can choose to be angry about things, or you can choose not to be angry about things. You can choose to be stressed about things you can't change, or you can choose to not let that affect you. And the book does acknowledge that it's far easier said than done. But I think throughout this book, Derren Brown just planted a lot of seeds for me to think about things and think about my own life and think about my own happiness. And I think this book really enabled me to take charge of my own emotions and feelings again. And it exposed some of the flaws that I had in thinking about my own happiness and empowerment. It wasn't an easy read. It was a read that I actually found very difficult. I really had to pay attention when I was reading this, but it really paid off. I got the reward for putting that effort into this book. And while it is my 10th favourite on the list, I think this is possibly the book I read this year so far that has been the most impactful on me, that I think in some ways has changed my life the most. So that's pretty high praise. In contrast to that, this next book on the list is here because it was just a bloody good time. So this is The Couple by Helly Acton. Now, when I originally read this, I gave it 4 stars. I was like, this was super entertaining. I had a great time. It was a good idea. All of the characters were compelling, but I didn't think there was anything kind of profound in it. I didn't think there was anything in it that made it absolutely spectacular or was going to leave me thinking about it. But actually, in the days after reading this, and in fact in the weeks after reading this, I couldn't stop thinking about it. So this is a book that explores what would happen if society's views around relationships were entirely opposite to the way they are now. So in our society now, it is seen as the norm to be in a relationship. Being in a relationship is something that is desirable, it's favourable in society, and a lot of society is geared towards working for people in couples. That is entirely flipped on its head in this book. It is seen to be very strange to be in a couple, and a lot of the things in our world that people often say to single people, things like, oh, you are so pretty and intelligent, I don't understand why you're single. That's flipped in this book. It's, you're so pretty and intelligent, why are you in a relationship? In this society, it is seen as so strange for someone to come from a couple family where your parents are in a relationship. It's really stigmatized for that to be your background, in perhaps the same way in our current world where it's stigmatized to be from a single parent family. And we are exploring all of that through the eyes of our main character Millie, who works for a hookup app. This app becomes involved with another company who have developed a drug that will prevent anyone from developing romantic feelings. So you pop these 2 pills and you don't have the burden of developing romantic interest in anyone. Being interested in being in a relationship is seen as detrimental. It's seen as something that is going to really hold you back. So people want to stop that from happening. And while that is all going on in Millie's work life, someone else joins her company that she might have some romantic interest in. I just found this such an interesting thought experiment of a book. As someone who is forever single, I have some thoughts on the things that Helly Acton is raising in this book. And I just really appreciated an entirely different perspective on being single being presented in this book. The book doesn't criticize being in love. Ultimately, it ends up being a book that shows the merit in being in relationships. But I think more so than that, it shows the merit in choice. It shows the merit in your own happiness, your own personal happiness, regardless of whether you are in a relationship or single or dating. Just thought it was a really fun time. Next on this list I have It's Not About the Burqa, which is edited by Mariam Khan. This is a collection of essays from lots of different Muslim women with different backgrounds and life experiences that gives them the space to discuss whatever they want to talk about. They have the floor. Muslim women are so often a group of people that are spoken on behalf of, spoken over, and this book gives a group of women an opportunity to speak for themselves, to share their experiences and what is important to them and what has been impactful in their lives. There are so many different perspectives in this book. There were things in it that I hadn't really considered before. There were things that I was slightly aware of but hadn't really delved into in any detail. It's a book where women explore their relationship with their faith, but also their relationship with romance and marriage and love and divorce, their relationships with fashion and their careers and being a Muslim woman in a male-dominated career. I think the essays are also arranged really fantastically and is a testament to the editor in how the topics lead into one another, but also how they also balance one another. I know I've come to this book a little bit later than a lot of people have, but if you haven't managed to pick this one up yet, I would highly recommend it. The most recent addition to this list is Snowflake by Louise Nealon. This is a debut literary fiction novel that I read very recently, and it follows 18-year-old Debbie and the various difficulties that she has in that time in her life. She has been brought up on a dairy farm, and we follow her going to college or to university at Trinity College in Dublin, which is a bit of a culture shock for her. It follows the complicated and messy friendships that she strikes up there, and I think this book really delves into how messy female friendships can be at that age and how intense they can be. The book also looks very intimately and acutely at Debbie's sex life and her whole approach to her body and sex, which at times she has a very dangerous relationship with these things, quite a toxic relationship with them. A lot of the things that she talks about in this regard are very visceral and difficult to read about, but they also just feel so honest. We're also looking at Debbie's very difficult home life and the fraught relationship that she has with her mother and her uncle in particular. At times these bonds are very strong, but at other times there is so much tension in them. And ultimately this is a book that is about so many different characters' tremendous mental health problems and how damaging it can be when you don't open up and share your problems, when you don't talk about the things that are causing you so much internal stress and turmoil. And I think one of the things the book really captures is just how utterly terrifying it is becoming a grown-up and these huge big emotions that you haven't had to grapple with before. I thought this was such an impressive book, and while it has those very heavy topics, there is also so much humor in this. If you are someone like me who has only recently watched Gilmore Girls, I think all of the chats around Gilmore Girls in this book will make you laugh. So pleased that I read this book recently and it's had the time to make it onto this list. Next on my list is The Henna Wars by Adiba Jagadar. This was our group read for the Irish Readathon, and it was a book that I completely flew through. I read this so quickly and I loved every minute of it. In this book we are following Nishat, who is a teenage girl from a Muslim Muslim family, and she has recently come out as a lesbian. And while her parents are well-intentioned and well-meaning and want to do the best thing for her, they really missed the mark initially. They completely dismiss this as a phase, and then if they just don't acknowledge it, then it will pass. And they have a lot of damaging ideas around what Nishat's sexuality means. Ultimately, that does end up with a happy ending, and overall this is just such a positive book about being a teenage queer person, while simultaneously not shying away from the difficulties. And there is a trigger warning for an outing with this book. And while this book has a lot to do with that experience around sexuality, it's also a book that is about cultural appropriation. Nishat is taking part in a business competition in her school, and she has decided to set up a henna business. It's something that is part of her culture, something that she's really passionate about and has a talent for. Meanwhile, Flavia, another girl in her school, is also setting up a henna business, and Flavia is Brazilian. Henna is not part of her culture, it's just something that she kind of thought was cool and wanted to try out. And a lot of the book deals with those conversations around cultural appropriation versus appreciation. What is it that Flavia is doing? Is what she's doing okay? And of course, amongst that, Nishat and Flavia are also falling for each other. All of the characters in this book felt so true to life to me. The bonds between Nishat and her sister felt really authentic. The complications in her friend groups felt really true to life. And even though it has been many years since I was a teenager in Dublin, there were definitely aspects of that experience that I recognised from my own upbringing. I think the author did an amazing job of capturing that. I would love for more people to read this book, and I am really excited to read this author's newer book called Honey and Issues Guide to Fake Dating, because I love a fake dating trope, and if it's as good as this book was, I know I'm gonna love it. Now into the top 5. I have Me, My Dad and the End of the Rainbow by Benjamin Dean. And if you want a book that is gonna put a smile on your face, that is gonna fill your heart with so much joy, please read this book. This is a middle grade novel that is about Archie. And Archie knows that there is something that is not right with his parents. They are arguing all of the time. He doesn't know what's going on. He knows that they're keeping some sort of secret from him. And it turns out that secret is that his father has just come out as gay. Archie doesn't fully understand this. He's worried about what kind of repercussions that it has for their family unit. At no point is he ever prejudiced. He never judges his father at all. He just doesn't really know what this means for him and his parents moving forward, and he wants to understand. One day, a flyer falls out of his father's pocket, and this leads Archie on a journey to discover so much about the LGBTQ plus community and go on an adventure. And he doesn't go on this adventure on his own. He goes with some fantastic friends he has, and all of the supporting characters in this book are phenomenal. It's a book that really celebrates pride. It's a book that I think will mean so much to so many readers, adult and child alike. And it's the type of book that I wish I had as a kid. And it's so refreshing to have a queer book that isn't about sadness, that isn't about trauma. This is just a really happy book for kids. At no point does Archie ever have any prejudice towards his father. They're just kind of struggling to communicate for a little while. Archie wants to make sure his dad's okay, and Archie's dad wants to make sure he's okay, and they don't know how to navigate it. They don't know how to communicate. It's a book that celebrates that father-son bond, and it celebrates family, but it also celebrates the queer community and found families. I just love it. Next on my list, I have What White People Can Do Next by Emma Dabiri. You may remember that You Can't Touch My Hair by Emma Dabiri was my favourite non-fiction book of last year, and it is the highest non-fiction book on this list, so she's on track for 2 years in a row. While this is quite a small, short book, there is so much content in here around, what it says on the tin, what white people can do next. So I would not say this book is a starting point if you are someone who hasn't learned a lot about racism already, but I think if you are someone who has, maybe read a few books on racism before, you've put that work in, you've been reading articles, you've been watching documentaries, and you haven't picked this one up yet, I would really encourage you to further that education. This was a book that I had to read very slowly in order to fully absorb it, because there are elements of it that are very academic. Emma is interrogating really socially ingrained things that are difficult to unpick. She's looking at white savior complexes. She's looking at how race intersects with capitalism. It's a very current book, and I would advise, if you are interested in reading this, do try and pick it up soon. It's definitely a book that you need to put a lot of energy into, but you will get a lot out of it. And it's a text that you really do need to sit with for some time, but I think it's such an important book, I couldn't not have it on this list. Next, I have two books by the same author, and I'm kind of going to talk about them in tandem. So we have What's a Girl Gotta Do and Are We All Lemmings and Snowflakes by Holly Bourne. I don't know if I could really separate these two for which one I preferred, but I am going to start with this one, Are We All Lemmings and Snowflakes. This book is all about a teenage protagonist named Olive who has a number of mental health difficulties. However, she has never agreed to find out what her diagnosis is. She has no interest in being labelled in a particular way. And one day a doctor recommends this specific residential program that is about to be run for the very first time. Olive and her parents think, well, may as well give it a go, so off Olive goes. And we follow the various methods of treatment that are recommended to Olive and her reluctance to partake in them. We follow her interactions with a lot of different teenagers who are going through their own stuff, different stuff, some of it similar to her, some of it entirely different. We take a particularly acute look at her relationships with two of the boys that are also on this program and the different reasons that she is drawn to them. So one of them who is kind of like the typical kind of like bad boy, you know, smokes, plays music, you know, that kind of vibe. And then a guy who is much more kind of like reserved and introverted, who is interested in maths. And ultimately, over the course of this book, what Olive is discovering is the power of kindness, the power of empathy and taking time to understand people and understand herself. All of the other kids around her are learning those things at the same time, and also learning the importance of forgiveness and not feeling defined by your mental health condition, but simultaneously taking responsibility for it. It really captured for me that period of adolescence where if you are someone who has mental health difficulties and you're trying to deal with them on top of all of the other stuff around being a teenager, how difficult it is. It's a book that celebrates kindness and celebrates friendship, and what I love about Holly Bourne's books is that her teenagers feel so authentic. They feel like such fully formed human beings. They feel so flesh and bone. And of course, that's also true of What's a Girl Gotta Do. This is the third book in the Spinster trilogy. I read the first two books in this series quite a few years ago now, so I wondered maybe I should read the first two books before I go into this one. But I ended up diving straight in and it was totally fine. Like, I was able to remember everything about the first two books, or I had enough context and remembered enough that it was fine. So in each of the three books in this series, we are following one girl from a friendship group when they form the Spinster Club. So in each of the books in this trilogy, we're following one of three teenage girls. They are all friends and they form what is called the Spinster Club. And it's them kind of discovering that sexism is a thing, and then discovering that feminism is a thing, and coming together and sharing their thoughts and talking about all those kinds of things. And Lottie, who is our main character in this third book, is definitely the most kind of politically engaged and enraged. I'd say she's definitely the most kind of staunch feminist of the three. And one day, after having a very difficult interaction with two men on the street in which she does not feel safe and she ends up feeling powerless and angry, she decides that she's going to call out every single instance of sexism that she witnesses. That is pretty exhausting for Lottie because she has to call out everything from the tiny moments, from slightly sexist things that are in her textbooks at school to people making direct comments on her. She is calling out absolutely everything, and it is so exhausting for her. It takes such a toll on her mental health, and that is just when it's confined to her life in her school. When what she's doing begins to garner attention on the internet and get media attention, everything explodes. She is attacked online, she is subject to vicious trolling, and it is so difficult and so overwhelming for her. And I remember feeling that way. I never had anything on the scale that Lottie had, but I remember being that age and realizing how embedded sexism is, how difficult it all is to dismantle because it's so embedded, because it's so culturally ingrained, and how difficult all of those feelings are. You want to just dismantle the entirety of patriarchy on your own, but you can't do it on your own. I think the book captures that kind of activist fatigue that so many women like Lottie experience. I also feel like if I wanted someone to understand me as a person, this is one of the books that I would give them. I feel very similar to Lottie in plenty of ways. I can't remember exactly how it's phrased, but there is a part of this book where like the last line of one of the chapters is, oh, he's such an asshole. And then the first line of the next chapter is, I really fancy him. And I was like, oh, it me. Just feel like Lottie and I are kindred spirits, you know? Okay, are we ready? I don't know if you're ready. I mean, you're probably ready. I'm just trying to build like a little bit of tension. I don't think it's any surprise, honestly. My favourite book of the year so far is All Our Hidden Gifts by Caroline O'Donoghue. This author was all over my favourite books list last year, and this is her young adult debut, and I fucking loved it. In this book, we're following our teenage main character named Maeve, who gets in quite a lot of trouble at school. She's not necessarily like a bad kid, she just doesn't really care. And one day, as a punishment, she is cleaning out this old like cupboard or something, and she comes across a tarot deck. She takes it home, she starts learning about tarot, and turns out she's got a bit of a gift for it. It's not something she's taking hugely seriously to begin with, but people are interested in having their cards read, and she gives it a go. And then one day, after doing a reading for her former best friend, that former best friend goes missing. And Maeve can't help but feel responsible. And over the course of the book, we are trying to find out what has happened to this girl. Is it something that has a logical explanation where the police are going to be able to find out what happened to her? Or is there something a bit more supernatural going on? Something a bit more witchy, and something that only Maeve is going to be able to help with. I love witchy Irish books, so of course I was going to love this. But something I also loved about this book was the experiences of queer teenagers in this book. This isn't a book that kind of, you know, from the cover it screams that it's gay. But it is. And the older sibling of the former best friend, the missing girl, it would be great if I remembered that girl's name. Lily. Her name is Lily. The missing girl is called Lily. So Maeve strikes up a relationship with Lily's older sibling. And through that relationship, those two characters are exploring their own sexual identity, their own gender identities. And those experiences are just depicted so sensitively, and they're not made a big deal of. Even though they're a big deal for the characters, it's something that they are discovering about themselves. And at no point do either of them judge each other. This book is also so Irish as well, and I think it deals with these things in a way that is very specifically Irish, where there are things that you would kind of recognise and pick up on a bit more if you have that experience. Things like religious influence and religious extremism, both historically and in the present day. Also, this book has a Nadine Coyle joke in it, and it's one of the most subtly woven in jokes that I've ever witnessed in a book. I thought it was fantastic, genuinely made me proper laugh. I loved it. When I first read this, I read it digitally. I had an e-arc of it from NetGalley, and when the physical came out, I immediately bought it. But now I really want to reread it already, and I never reread books, let's just be honest about that. But never mind wanting to reread a book within the same year of having first read it. Like, that's not a thing that happens to me. But I would like to do it with this book. Love it so much. So there we have it. There are my top 10 books of the year so far. As I said, they will all be linked down below in the description if you want to find out more about them. I would love to know if you've read any of these books before and what you thought of them. Did you love them as much as I did? And I would love to know what your favourite books of this year so far are as well. It will be really interesting to look back on this video at the end of the year and see if these books are still on the list. What I have found over the years is that staying power with books makes a real difference. So sometimes I've maybe put a book at 8th midway through the year, and then it actually ends up being on my favourite books of the year list, whereas something that I put as 3rd didn't make that list. It's really interesting to see how these things end up working out. But yeah, if you have any thoughts on anything I've mentioned in this video, or you want to let me know what your favourite book of the year so far is, do leave me a comment down below, or leave me one of your favourite animal emojis so I know that you're here. That's all I'm going to talk about today. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will speak to you in my next video.